Okay, so the first one we're going to look at here, which we briefly went over in the introduction, is what happens after we play c3 and the bishop decides to go back to a5. This is one of the most common moves, and we're going to play virtually the same way with all of these moves, which we're going to play d4. Now, the opponent will not always take on d4, but they will almost always take on d4 because if they don't, then we can either win this pawn or we can get a huge center. Let's just look really quickly and see what happens if they decide to play passively and not to take this pawn. One of the most logical things to do in that case would be simply to play d6 here. But then if they do that, they give us the option of taking, and if they take back, trading off queens in order for them not to be able to lose the right of castling and take back with the knight, and then we would win a pawn right here. And not only would we win this pawn, but we have active pieces, whereas black does not. We are ahead in development and can castle and get our pieces out much more rapidly. So this may not seem like that big of a deal. White has a very, very dominant position here. We're also threatening f7, making this knight have to stay in this really bad passive position in order to defend f7, and we just have a much, much easier time with this position than black, and we're up a whole pawn. So it's not good for black to be too passive. In general, with this Evans Gambit opening, almost no matter what black does, if they try to avoid the Gambit or they try to play defensively, white will get an advantage. So they pretty much are forced to play aggressively and play into our hands. Take the Gambit, take the pawns that we're offering, and then see if they can hold the position together and keep the pawn advantage. It's very difficult for black to play psychologically, and of course it's very fun for us to play as white. Now there's no guarantee that we're going to win. Of course, there's never a guarantee in chess that you're going to win, but we're going to have a lot more opportunities to win, and we're going to have pressure on the opponent's king pretty much no matter what. So it's a really, really fun thing to play, and a lot of the time, as I mentioned before, people don't know what to do and they'll make mistakes and will win really easily. So I'm going to teach you guys the most aggressive way to play, which is to go ahead and castle and allow our opponent to take another pawn here. In this case, pretty much for sure, the strongest thing that we can do is put our queen on b3. If the bishop is somewhere else, like for example on c5 or retreats back to e7, as we're going to see later, this is not where we're going to put the queen because black has this move knight to a5, and he can force a trade of our bishop. So we need to move our queen, and then he can take the bishop, and he can take away one of our most active pieces. But since the bishop here, in this case, is occupying the a5 square, the knight can't do that, and basically black is forced to put his queen on e7 or f6. e7 being much better because if he plays it to f6 in order to defend this f7 square, then we could bring our bishop out here with tempo, and then black's in really big trouble, and it gets very complicated. So he's pretty much forced to play this move, queen to e7, and defend this pawn. Now, if we want to, we can simply take this pawn back right here with our knight and continue to develop. If black says, okay, well, I'm up a couple pawns right now, I'm just going to go ahead and trade pieces like this, we still have a lot going for us. Now let's just take a look at this. If we decide to play it this way, we've already castled, black has not. We already learned that this pawn is untouchable because if the queen takes it, we can pin the queen to the king and he will lose the queen and the game. So we don't need to worry about that. We are threatening to take this pawn here. So black probably have to play a simple move, knight to f6 here, in which case we can do a lot of different things. We can play our bishop out, our queen's defending our bishop, attack the queen. We can simply push this pawn forward, which is a good move because we have two defenders on it. the knight can't take it, and even if they could, we still have the threat of our rook moving to e1 and pitting the queen. And that's one of the things about the Evans Gambit, is that the tempo, or two, as we say in chess, that are taken to capture the pawns over here by black allows us as white to mobilize our pieces so rapidly that, if you notice here, black is in a very, very passive position. None of these pawns have been moved at all. And we have all of these open diagonals and lines for our pieces because we sacrificed those two pawns in order to do so. So it's just very difficult for black to play here. He can't move the knight here. He can do something like this, threaten our queen, but it doesn't really gain him anything. We have a lot of good options as far as where we can go. In this case, we can simply move our queen here, threaten the knight, and he hasn't really gained anything. He's got nothing much that he can do. He can look at doing things like this. We can take en passant, and he's in a rough spot. We have a lot of really good things we can do. He can't take here because we'll take his knight, our queen. If he takes his pawn back here, now he's got an isolated pawn, which is ugly. We can threaten his knight by taking our rook out now, and it's just really tricky for him to play. There's not much he can do. Everything is kind of awkward. He can move his knight out of the way over here, and we don't really want to trade queens right here, although you do always want to look at the option, what if I trade? Okay, his knight's pinned. Do we have anything that we can do? Can we pressure him? I mean, we could do this, force him to play the pawn out. You want to calculate everything several moves. Don't make the assumption that, okay, we don't want to trade queens because we don't gain any material. You want to look and see, is it worth it several moves ahead? Attack this pawn. You can't push this pawn forward because we take it because the knight's pinned, for example, like this. We gain a pawn, so we're winning a pawn back with pressure, with piece coordination. And you want to analyze this and look to see, is it worth it to trade off queens? Do we have enough compensation? If he's able to get out of problems, then we don't want to do it. In general, when you sacrifice some pawns in a gambit to get an attack, you don't want to trade the queens off. So if you found yourself in this position, you could do something very simple. Just attack the queen by moving our queen over. For example, we're attacking his queen. He can't move it because it's pinned, and he's going to have to do something like this and block it. And so we can simply take that if we did that. And then he'd still be in a big bind. He'd have to block it, and we're in the driver's seat here. We are almost certainly going to win this game. We have all kinds of moves that are very, very dangerous. Bring our bishop out, aim it at the queen. He has to move it somewhere, and there's just a lot of ways for us to win this game and get pressure. Look how all of our pieces are coordinated. Look how everything is working together. Actually, in this case, we have so many tactics. We can just go check and win their queen because the knight's pinned. For example, say he blocks it. The bishop, just take the queen. His knight can't take back because it's pinned to the king. He can take our bishop, but he is going to lose the game, obviously. We can even go ahead and sacrifice the exchange to expose his king, and there's just nothing he can do. He's done. Okay, so that's just one of many, many examples of how this game could play out, especially if you're playing blitz and there's not a lot of time for your opponent to think. So go ahead and feel free to take this pawn here with the knight. Don't worry about them trading. I mean, this bishop is actually black's most active piece, and we have just moved our knight to recapture this pawn. So if they want to trade their most active piece for one of our less active pieces and give us the bishop pair, that's fine. None of their other pieces are developed. So we maintain a very, very healthy initiative and a very nice lead in development, even though we've given up a couple of pawns. And that's what this opening is all about. So with that, in the next lesson, we will look at what happens if we decide to leave that pawn there and be even more aggressive with our